One of the things I've told a lot of my students over the last few years is so many of the choices that I make today are practical in terms of equipment. You know, when I was in high school, I'd choose a mouthpiece because I liked how it sounded, or a reed because I liked how it made me sound in my little bubble. But as I got older, I read stories about Harold Wright's production sound up close was extremely breathy, airy, and you don't hear that on any of his recordings. Maybe a little bit in his Music -1 Rimbaud Solo de Concours recording, a little bit. But this whole idea of, to quote Bernard, a great principal clarinet sound doesn't necessarily sound good up close has led me to so many epiphanies and discoveries. So I want to start off talking about what I look for in a reed. So when I got this Montanaro guided reface Henri Chedeville, I was trying to find good reeds with it, and in talking to a lot of his former students, he really liked V12s. And I grew up playing V12s on my M14, so this really works well. Especially in the throat tones, I really get that Montanaro flavor. But here's what's really interesting. Let's say I switch from that reed and from this gold-plated Bonnard ligature to something I just played a gig on, a principal gig on. This is a Blue Box 3.5, a really good Blue Box 3.5. I go to a minor level kind of Montanaro vibe to Gigliotti vibe, I think. I mean, and it's funny because people hear a lot of the Gigliotti solo recordings, and they don't sound as good as when he played in the orchestra, say in the 50s, the really great 50s Ormandy recordings, 60s Ormandy recordings. Well, I just think that's amazing that I can get that difference. This doesn't necessarily sound as good up close. So this has led me to some interesting things, and I'm not saying that blue boxes make better orchestral principal reeds versus V12s. I'm just saying that particular V12 had good kind of chamber and solo characteristics, whereas that blue box had more of a principal characteristic. So if I compare to a few other mouthpieces, I'm going to try a great Bettany mouthpiece that I love a lot. And I'm going to try it with that principal reed. That doesn't really sound principal to me. This is a great mouthpiece. I love it a lot. But it's not necessarily a great, big, projecting principal clarinet mouthpiece, even with a principal reed. So, could I find a principal reed for that? Maybe not, at least not without working a lot harder. This is a Mellophone Berceau SGDG. This is the same blank as a lot of the early Henris, like that first mouthpiece I played. Here's that principal clarinet reed. an orchestra with that. That's nothing. I just lean back and it goes. Can I still make that sound? This particular mouthpiece make a good chamber mouthpiece? Well, let's try a more kind of covered reed in my own bubble. It still has that principal clarinet vibe. So is this mouthpiece really only good for principal clarinet? Maybe Benny Goodman or Artie Shaw? Maybe. That's interesting. Here's a Clark Forbes Zinner. I'm going to try that principal clarinet reed. I'm playing all these on a 79,000 with original pads. I love Clark Forbes, I love his work, but this is not a principal mouthpiece. In my opinion, I have to work too hard. And if I go lighter with the reed, well, then it's going to get too bright. This is interesting. Here's a Matson refaced Old Selmer mouthpiece. I'm going to try the principal reed. Well, that's the principal sound all right, but maybe it's a touch bright. Can I find a reed to make it a little darker and still get that principal sound? No, that's not necessarily a principal mouthpiece with that reed, but it's also too bright to be a chamber mouthpiece. Interesting. Without some major modifications to my voicing, tongue position, etc. So I got a couple other cool things here. Here's a Casper mouthpiece. This is a really great two-line I just got. This is my favorite type of Casper mouthpiece. I'm going to try it with that principal reed to start with. As I say in my Casper video, some of the Ann Arbors are some of the best Caspers I've ever played. That has a more covered, more round sound than any of these Fedele. Does it sound like it's projecting though? Does it sound like it's getting a principal clarinet sound? Not really. Not like some of those others. Not like that mellophone, that Henri Fedele. Okay, check this out. This is a 3. Gonna open it. Now, if I play this 3 on the Henri Fedele, let's hear how that sounds. Obviously, that's way too thin. If I try it on the mellophone, the super big sounding mellophone, also not great. But if I try it on the Casper, ooh, that might be something. That needs some work, but that might actually work. That's a 3, but I actually fooled you. It's a 3 E flat reed. And the Casper still has this round quality to it. So this is where I talk about the self-absorbed clarinet sound. Self-absorbed literally and figuratively. We want to sound good to ourselves. We want to get this nice, beautiful character up close in our bubble. But if we're really serving the ensemble, sometimes it will sound a little harsh up close. I think of it like a Spanish paella or paella. It's this meal where it's rice and chorizo and vegetables and seafood and sometimes other kinds of meat, and it's just a mess of food, but it's also good, and you get it all at once. And that's like clarinet sound. It's just this mass of overtones, principal clarinet sound. If you're second, you can be more ordered. If you're chamber music, even especially like recorded solo, but even orchestral solo, in front of the orchestra, you can be a little more ordered. But principal clarinet, sometimes you hear them, they just get this big massive sound, or they're working really, 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 really hard. And that's where I talk about self-absorbed. It's pleasing to us, not to the audience, but also we're literally absorbing. There's too much resistance in the setup for it to go. That's where I started with practicality. So I think a lot of that comes with us wanting to sound more dark. I have a phrase: dark is the poor man's deep, or the pretentious man's deep. So if I was to talk about another approach, not German but Austrian, this is an Austrian style facing, Viennese facing with one of these Van Doren Blackmester Austrian style reeds. Absolutely traveling to the audience. It's a little bit darker, but it seems a little bit more wispy. It seems a little smaller. And so even the Austrian approach is not as well, obviously it's nowhere near as self-serving, but even that doesn't sound as melodious up close. There's still that wispiness in the sound. Again, I'll go back to that Kaspar. Now, let's say I use this Kaspar for something that's not necessarily principal clarinet. Well, then it's great. How about I do some like Eddie Daniels on it? You know, in a more commercial setting. I think this is a great mouthpiece. Almost gets that Paul Desmond approach. And that's also where I say these can be great saxophonist mouthpieces, because you can play a thinner reed, it's still round. It still sounds great up close, you know? You see, I'm not used to that at all. But, that doesn't sound like Artie Shaw. That sounds a little more like Eddie Daniels. It's got that commercial kind of openness to it. It still would make a beautiful classical mouthpiece, but there's something about it that, you know, is always thick, is always round. So, you know, that might sound great to a recording up close to this mic right here. Compare that to that first Henri with the principal reed, the Montanaro alla Gigliotti. I guarantee you this is a lot less work in the back of an orchestra. brighter up close, yes. From a distance, there's so much color, the audience can feel the sound. I can still do commercial though. Not quite as well though. So often, the reeds that I choose, the mouthpiece that I choose, the setup that I choose, is for practical purposes, contextual purposes. I want to be heard to the audience. I want to think in terms of how the audience is perceiving my sound, not the other way around.